And all of a sudden, I could relate to people. I could talk to people, and I wasn't so self-conscious that I was requiring them to have to like validate me all the time. You know, thinking back, I remember what it was like before this period in my life, because I spent a good decade and a half really in my head, like painfully in my head. Like, if you've ever been around a person that's constantly second guessing themselves and questioning every interaction they're having with you, that was me. I was that guy.
That's like the opposite of flow state.
Yeah, exactly. It's the struggle, you know, and the struggle is real. And I lived really heavily in the struggle for like 15 years, from my early teens and preteens up until I was about 25, 26. And, you know, I've been around people like that since then, and they're pieces of work, you know. They require intense emotional and social labor just to be around them. And so as a result, most people didn't bother spending much time with me because I was so self-conscious, so in my head. And I didn't have very many friends, and I was pretty lonely. But then I started doing disaster relief work just kind of on a whim, because I felt like something needed to happen and I needed a shift in my life. And while I was there, I encountered some of the locals we were working with in Thailand were fire spinners. And so they shared with me fire spinning, which was extremely challenging for me at the time.
Is it a Thai art traditionally, or is that just where you found it?
There's definitely Thai people that do it. Some of them were ethnically Malaysian and Indonesian. There's a lot of island and Southeast Asian traditions that do different types of fire spinning, from like the Maori and Samoans to the Hawaiian, like fire knife, Filipino eskrima. But yeah, there's definitely Thai fire spinning as a thing. And so I picked up a stick and started spinning it around. And at first I was dropping it, bonking myself. But then I actually jumped up on like a swing and started balancing on a swing while I was doing it. And something about that extra level of challenge actually made the spinning of the stick easier. And I got into a flow state, and I really remember distinctly, you know, balancing on this swing, which at first was really, really difficult. And then it just clicked. And all of a sudden I was like starting to walk forward and backwards on it. And I noticed something as I started incorporating this practice. I started getting out of my head. I was like getting into my body instead. And all of a sudden, I could relate to people. I could talk to people, and I wasn't so self-conscious that I was requiring them to have to like validate me all the time. And I had something that I liked to do that other people found interesting too, so that helped as well. And so accessing these flow states started to unlock for me the ability to connect with humans and to actually form deep, meaningful relationships in a way that had been completely inaccessible to me for over a decade. And to this day, I still try to share the way to access flow states with people, because I know how transformative it can be. I know how difficult my life was before that, and just how much more graceful and fun my life has been since. So I'm now a middle school teacher, and I teach mostly history, but also like college, career, and character. And I have a club after school where I show kids, we call it movement arts. And I show kids how to basically get out of their heads and into their bodies. We do martial arts, we do parkour, rhythmic gymnastics, breakdancing. All of those is just being challenging physical activities that require the kids to get outside their comfort zone and to push themselves a little bit. And I've seen one of my students, he was the most apathetic, he was my worst student in all my classes. Out of hundreds of students, he didn't do any assignments. When I would ask him about it, he would be just head down on his desk and say, why bother? Why do I need to do this? He was just completely burnt out on life at like 12. And I kept pushing him to join my club, and he finally came out, and he immediately just took to it. It was clear that he was coming out of COVID very physically disembodied and dissociated. And so now that he was able to start practicing parkour and doing all these different movement techniques I was showing him, he really came out of his shell and started doing all his assignments in class. He's autistic, but all of a sudden he's starting to make friends all over. Now he's one of the most popular kids in class. They voted him president of our club. And, you know, it's clear to me that the act of getting into a flow state was a big part of how he came out of his shell and overcame a lot of these kind of crippling social and emotional disabilities that he had. And so I really want to be able to share that with as many people as possible, because I've seen both in myself and in others how transformative it can be. And the fun part is that it's different for everybody. Like no two people use the same pathway to get there, and it even is different for each person day to day because of that moving target.
Between people and within people.
Exactly. And so, I've spent a lot of my time here at the Emerald Village building out locations that can be almost sensory feasts that challenge people to try different things and try moving in different ways so that they can access those flow states and ideally use them in a productive way for their lives. Because it's not really an end in itself. Like some people become flow junkies where they're like chasing that adrenaline high, but it's really a tool for accomplishing challenging things.
You got to integrate it.
Yeah, it's all about integrating and not just wallowing in it, but sometimes I'll get into a flow state and then actually cut off whatever activity I was doing, usually a physical one like slacklining or breakdancing or spinning a stick around. And then I'll go answer a bunch of emails that I've been putting off for a while. Or I'll go and like write something that I've had writer's block on. But now when you're in a flow state, you don't have writer's block in a flow state. It's almost impossible to have your thoughts and your worries get in your way, which oftentimes happens when you get plateaued or stuck in some kind of thought.
Do you ever feel like you lose it in the transition?
You can, because like I said, it's metabolically intensive. So if you do it for a while, like 45 minutes to an hour, and then come out of it, then you've probably squeezed everything out of the juice box. But if you go for like half an hour and then transition, you've gotten into kind of aerobic metabolism, and so you got sort of a fire in your belly, and so you usually have like 30-45 minutes left after that before it burns out.
If I may ask, you were talking in the beginning about just being self-conscious as a kid. Why do you think that was?
There's a lot of different reasons. I'm the fifth of 6 kids, so I have a lot of very talented older brothers and sisters. And so I constantly felt the need to prove myself because they were like all-American athletes and captains of the soccer or the water polo team or like, academic decathlon champions and that kind of thing, student body president. And so I always felt like I had a lot to live up to. And so I had a chip on my shoulder. I was very short and underweight when I entered high school. And that's around when it really started for me. I was like 100 pounds, 5 foot nothing, and had gone from a grade school with just like 30 kids to a high school with 2,000 kids. And in the transition, I didn't bring any of my friends with me, and I never really got the ability to gain friends while I was there because I was so constantly wanting to prove myself to people that it was just exhausting to be around me.
It's repulsive in a sense.
It is repulsive. It's one of those really sad things when you see somebody doing it because all they really want is to be loved and accepted. But that intense desire that's all in their head gets in the way of them getting exactly what they want.
It's cool that you could identify that in your students all these years later.
Yeah, no, I see it all the time. I'm not just students. Sometimes I'll have peers, that I'll just be like, hey, it's okay. Relax. You don't have to worry so much about whether or not you're being well received. But it's hard. You can't really like talk a person through it. They have to really find their own way to purpose and meaning. And a lot of it is also just having something that is in your life that you can feel proud of without needing other people to validate it. So I think a lot of it was because I was so eager for external validation all the time that I didn't have my own source for feeling good about myself. And getting into a flow state, because you're doing something challenging by its very nature, means that you have something that once you accomplish it, you're going to be proud of it. And it doesn't really matter whether somebody else witnesses it or not.
It's almost like by definition, if you're getting in flow state, it's challenging, and therefore you will be proud of yourself. It's like a natural conclusion of it. Yeah,
it's like a built-in sense of accomplishment and achievement because you can't get into a flow state without doing something that's just beyond your current skill level. And once you get in that flow state, chances are you'll crush it because you're 40 times better than what you were when you're in your default mindset. And so it's a built-in feedback loop for feeling good about yourself and for doing things that you can feel good about and that you can, and it does get some of the external validation. Like fire spinning is a visually spectacular art form. And so I did get a lot of positive feedback from people in the course of doing it.
Well, I think most of the things that people are attracted to end up being like that you're mining for flow state end up being useful, or just like excellence is charismatic universally.
Absolutely.
I mean, some domains are more charismatic than others, but just in general, even if it's something I don't care about, like Minecraft, if someone's world class at Minecraft, that's cool.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, there's a Greek term called eretophilia, which is the love of excellence. And I discovered that I'm a hardcore eretophile in the process of getting into flow states, because I just love witnessing people do awesome stuff, like be really good at something. One of my best friends says that Kung Fu is actually not about fighting and doing good martial arts, but it's actually about grace, effortlessness, and ease in all things.
Grease, for sure.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I really like to there's the concept of mirror neurons, where when you witness somebody doing something, the same part of their brain that's firing while they do it is firing in your brain. And so when somebody's in a flow state and you witness them, you actually get like a contact flow state off them. That's why when you watch an elite athlete spinning and bobbing and weaving and moving through their opponents,
Puts you in a trance.
It puts you in a trance because you're there with them. They're taking you along for that ride. And so I really like that about when I'm performing. I'm oftentimes going back to the places where I first learned a particular move or a particular sequence or something. And I like thinking that I'm actually taking everybody that's witnessing me along for the ride. Likewise, if you see somebody performing and they're really in their head and they're just worried about how people are witnessing them and whatnot, it feels kind of icky to watch them perform. And you're just like, it's not as fun and gratifying as it is when you're seeing somebody just like really in it.
And going back to that autism thing, a big thing about people with autism is that they have fewer and they have a harder time activating their mirror neurons. So I would imagine that that's part of why it's extra therapeutic for someone like that, is because it brings them back to that sense of connection.
Yeah.
That social understanding, that social learning.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things like being on the spectrum or having PTSD that can also manifest in these sort of negative feedback loops that can get in the way of having productive conversations or relationships. And there's this book called The Body Keeps the Score, where they talk about how important it is to move through trauma, to physically actually like process it through the body.
Literally move.
Yeah, and how there's this thing called synaptic pruning, where when you have trauma, you create these like nodules of negative feedback loops where you just keep like churning over the same idea and thought over and over, and it like hardwires this unproductive thought form in your brain. But if you regularly access flow states, because they're so metabolically intensive and because they require you to use your whole body to do stuff, they'll actually start pruning away these unproductive segments of your brain that are getting in the way of doing the thing that you're trying to do in that moment. And so flow states and accessing them regularly is one of the few things that's been shown to help ameliorate PTSD in a profound way by actually like clearing out the cobwebs, so to speak, in your mind. And when I first learned fire spinning in Thailand, that's what the locals were using it for. I was on this beach in Koh Phi Phi, which 2,000 people had died just in a square mile right around there. And the tsunamis came, 8 of them, one after each other. And each time they had more glass and metal and people mixed up in them. Oh. And so in the experience of that and in the days afterwards, everybody was intensely emotionally scarred, especially somebody who spent 7 of the waves up in a tree and then watches their grandma get torn out to the water and has to run down and get caught up in that mix. It's like a big blender, and so things would trigger them. Like a smell would trigger them, a sound would trigger them, a distant yell, they're hearing the voices. They had hardcore PTSD from living through that intense emotional experience. And they would say that they were haunted by ghosts and that the only way that they would go out at night was if they were going to watch fire spinning. And I think in a way they were watching the fire spinners perform, and it would calm that part of their mind. It would allow them to just be in the moment right there and witness something really spectacular, but at the same time, allow them to process through some of those experiences they're literally haunting them. And so those were the people that taught me how to spin fire. And to this day, I think about that, how they were able to sort of calm the ghosts and allow the memories that were preventing them from being able to function at night to just kind of settle down while they were in that mindset, whether they were the performer or not.
All right. Thank you so much, Nick.
No problem.
I'll show you the drawing. Dun, 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 dun.
Nice. What do you think? That's great. I like it.
Yay. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks, buddy.
Turn all these off. Hey guys, thanks for watching that video. If you have any comments, put them down below. Like the video if you liked it, and check out my other social medias. They're on the right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.